cooperate for Guyana. Let us cooperate for our land. Let us resolve to fight together. See we do it right together. Can we do it? Yes, we can.
Hello Guyana and welcome to this week's edition of The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining us again this week. Of course, with me is the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, His Excellency Brigadier David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
This week on The Public Interest, we focus on the importance of gender equality, especially with focus on women. Sir, your government, I know your government aims to ensure that Guyana becomes a more equal society. Let's first put gender equality into its context. What should that really mean for Guyanese?
Well, we started on the road to gender equality over 40 years ago with the state paper on equality for women, which was presented by the government at the time. It is my view that over the years we have not made sufficient we've made a lot of progress, but better could be done to ensure equality. Equality means equality. It does not mean subordination, it does not mean inequality. It sounds silly, but right now it is my view that women do not enjoy equal opportunities to males. And we've put it back on the agenda because it is a goal of our administration. Over the next 5 years, we must achieve greater equality than we have now. I don't know that we'll achieve absolute equality, but it is a firm goal of our administration that we must do more to remove the obstacles that prevent women from being treated equally to men.
Okay. Your Excellency, even before we talk about some of the challenges that women may face in terms of achieving equal, in a sense, sort of lifestyle to men, your government has been criticized in the last 3 or 4 months for there not being what they want to call enough senior female ministers. Without even going into some of the ins and outs of your government, how would you defend that?
Well, I don't regard it as an attack. It's a fair criticism. There is not a perfect balance. When we got into the administration, you must bear in mind, first of all, that we are a coalition administration. And the coalition parties, the 6 coalition parties, have the responsibility to nominate persons who will go into the National Assembly and also who become ministers. So to some extent, we have to bear that in mind. In addition to that, we are looking for persons who are qualified. We have several criteria for the nomination of persons to high office, and one of them is competence. I'm not saying that there are no competent women. We're looking for ethnic spread, we're looking for geographical spread, occupational diversity. There are about 6 major criteria that we have applied. And in the final analysis, we had to select the persons we felt who were most capable, most competent. And I think we did achieve some fair balance, and the next time we get into government in 2020, I am confident that there will be greater progress towards equalization. Right now it has not been possible. We did try, and we have to continue working. There are still some obstacles which prevent women from gaining access, which means that the pool from which we had to select also was limited. I hope that over the next 5 years, we could widen that pool so that there are more women from whom we can choose in the regions and in the National Assembly and in the cabinet. We're working on it. It's, as I said, although the state paper for equality of women was introduced 39 years ago, we have not achieved full equality, and we're not going to achieve it within the next 39 days. We're working on it, and I am very confident that by the end of our first tour of office, things will be better than they are now.
All right, sir. One of the challenges facing women, and people in society may even say that we have too many single mothers. So obviously one of the challenges facing our women is the fact that we have a very high level of poverty. I know recently you addressed a conference, a women's conference, and you spoke about government's plans to reduce poverty and of course making it a little more comfortable for our women. Let's talk about that for a bit.
Poverty is a big problem. Poor people don't have choices, where to send, which school to use, what transport to use, what to eat. Poverty reduces the scope and the scale of choices available to a household. And from the time I addressed Parliament on the 10th of June, I said that poverty was the elimination of extreme poverty was our main concern. Now, if you are to free women from poverty, free anybody from poverty, in my view, the first step will be to ensure that they get a sound education. Right now, there are too many dropouts, and there are too many young women and girls getting children who have dropped out of school. So we have to keep children in school, and we have to make sure that when they leave, they are properly educated so they could find proper employment. That's the second problem, jobs. I have been met by young women in the quarantine and elsewhere who have graduated from the teen campus at the University of Guyana but can't get jobs. I go into restaurants selling pizzas and hamburgers and other fast foods, and you have people serving there who have CXC subjects and are looking for a better job. I'm not saying that there's no dignity in what they're doing, but they prefer to be doing something else. And I think our country needs scientists, needs engineers, needs mathematicians who can perhaps perform at a higher level than flipping hamburgers in a restaurant. So we have not, over the past 2 or 3 decades, been creating sufficient jobs, and a lot of our young people still choose to migrate to Cayenne, to Suriname, to Venezuela, to Brazil. So one of our strategies is to facilitate micro-enterprise, to allow women to participate more meaningfully in the economy, and of course through self-employment so they can sustain their households. And we are examining means to provide them with microcredit so that they can get enough funds to start up small businesses. We don't have in mind giving people jobs in the government. We have in mind encouraging women, particularly, and men, but particularly women, to find jobs for themselves in the economy, producing, selling, distributing, and providing other services.
While we're waiting on those initiatives, because of course, obviously, these things can't happen overnight, there is also the issue of cost of living. Some may even say that the budget has not done enough to reduce the burden of the cost of living, especially on single mothers. What else can government or government plans to do almost immediately to relieve this burden?
The budget has done a lot. In terms of older folk, it has increased pensions to about $17,000. It has increased the level of social assistance. It has stabilized the minimum wage. It has increased the wages of cleaners and other workers within the system. So I think that the budget was concerned with poor people and making life more comfortable for them. Not as a gift or a reward, but to enable them to participate more meaningfully in the economy. So the budget is a very important tool in human development in terms of improving the choices and the livelihoods of people, not only on the coastline, but also in the hinterland. So I think that is one device to get more people in the economy, just by closing the gap between the rich and the poor, and giving the poorer folk an opportunity to participate more meaningfully in the economy. I think that is going to contribute to solving the problem.
All right. As I try to close it in again, specifically on women and, of course, gender equality, one of the things affecting women is the abuse of our women, unfortunately, by men. And you've talked about this a lot. We still see it happening today, 4 months after you've taken office. It's still happening. How can we help to eradicate domestic violence, violence against women, in order to promote gender equality?
Well, there's a temptation to put a lot of emphasis on law enforcement, better policing, through the criminal justice system, more prosecution, longer sentences. I believe those are necessary measures, but they're not sufficient measures. They're necessary because there needs to be enforcement. Abusers, whether they're male or female, abusers need to know that domestic abuse and violence are crimes, and that if they commit those crimes, they'll be punished. But apart from law enforcement, we must understand the nature or the causes of domestic violence. And that is the relationship that exists between adults and children, and between males and females in that household. Sometimes children are abused by older folk, and sometimes wives are abused by husbands, or husbands are abused by wives. What we need to do is have more it sounds soft, it sounds long-term, but there needs to be better education, more education, so that men learn to respect women and adults learn to respect their children. We have moved out of the age of corporal punishment. We've moved out of the age of harshness. And we now have to embed in the education system new values that young girls must be respected. They must be given an opportunity to complete their education. So we do away with the problem of teenage pregnancies at the same time. Instead of giving your child a slap or a whipping, maybe sit down and find out what problems affect the child. Why is the child not going to school, or why is the child not performing well at school or misbehaving? And solve the problem. Because if you whip a child, you wouldn't solve the problem. Perhaps the child may be hurt and may be punished, or maybe the person who's doing the whipping may feel satisfied. I gave him or her a good licking. But that does not solve the problem, because the problems, as you say, continue. Abuse continues. Let us pay more attention to causation. And if there's something deficient in our education system, let us try to solve the problem by nonviolent means. Because violence is cyclical. A father who is violent to his or her child would probably engender in that child the feeling that, okay, if I want to solve the problem, I must be violent to my children as well. So after several generations, you find people still committed to whipping and whipping their wives or their children, and that's why it continues, because physical violence doesn't solve problems. Look around the world today, you see, a lot of violence in the country, and it seems to be getting worse.
Okay.
We're not in any world war, but every day people are dying because people tend to resort to violent solutions. And in fact, they only succeed in perpetuating the violence. And that is why it seems to be an eternal, but society doesn't have to be like that. We could be peaceful, but it starts in the home, between husband and wife, between parents and children, that we now have to apply new tools to have that good life. And those tools are not violent tools.
Sir, finally on this topic, before I have to raise another issue, you have, in the past 4 or 5 years, David Granger has campaigned and he has preached about the importance of education. Now, some studies and research in the past would have shown that girls tend to do better in school during their school age, but again, we're still seeing women not being able to rise to the challenge, and the fact that there is not gender equality. How would you use the education system to ensure that our girls come up and perform at a level that they should be performing at?
Well, for one, it's access. I mean, although many girls who are in good schools and do better than males, there are not enough girls in schools. And many of them are part of the dropout phenomenon that has affected schooling throughout Guyana. So we need to ensure that more girls get into schools. You see, for example, if an older person, if an adult in a family falls ill, few families would tell the boys to stay home and look after your grandmother. It tends to be a girl, and that girl is deprived of schooling. And when that happens, we find that access to education is closed off. Sometimes if a girl gets a child in her mid-teens, age 14 or 15, she doesn't have the opportunity to continue schooling, and she drops out of school. So what we're talking about is giving girls greater opportunity to get involved in education and to succeed in education. Many of them, I think on average, might very well do better than males, but more of them need to be involved. The second thing is that we would like to see more girls going into the sciences. There's a tendency for girls to do languages and to do literature and to do what we call the humanities, the arts. But there's nothing wrong with girls getting involved in engineering, studying agriculture, getting into manufacturing, getting into science subjects as botanists, zoologists, chemists, physicists. That is one of the areas, I would say, of women's emancipation, that they must have the same lifestyle choices, the same choices in occupation as males now have. There shouldn't be any glass ceiling, and they should be able to rise to the top. More female managers, more female permanent secretaries, more female ministers. Yes, they're equal.
Okay, sir. Finally, before we have to wrap up, I must raise this issue, even though I know today's broadcast was only designed, I've only designed it to discuss gender equality. Your Excellency, you have been receiving some harsh criticisms, especially regarding the fact that since you took office, of course 4 months or so, you have not formally met with the media, our media corps, and persons believe that it's time that you meet with our media. How do you respond to those criticisms?
Well, it is true. I have not had a personal press conference, although many members of the media have approached me on a one-on-one basis, and I need to do that sooner rather than later. But what has happened over the last 3 months or so is that coming into government, a governmental structure has taken over where there was a more personalized structure in the past. As leader of the opposition, many of my colleagues, had to work in other places for a living, and they had day-to-day jobs, So I bore the burden of weekly press conferences. In fact, I had a program called Public Interest, which is this program. I had a weekly press conference. I had a television program at Channel 6, and I would engage more frequently with the media. But now, when we come out of cabinet, the Minister of State has the responsibility to engage the media. The Prime Minister is responsible for public information. And there are many more ministers now who are in full-time occupation as cabinet ministers, and they engage the media. So things have changed, and there is now a spreading of the responsibility for communication of public information among a wider range of people, Minister of State, Prime Minister, and the other senior ministers. But in due course, I will be meeting the media, and much of what I have to say to the public has come out in the form of addresses, addresses to the Gender Conference, addresses to the indigenous people, addresses to Parliament. So there's no shortage of information, but I too would like to look forward to an interaction with the members of the media, so they can look forward to meeting me very, very soon in September.
Thank you very much, sir. Viewers, thank you for tuning in. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. Of course, with me is the President of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, His Excellency Brigadier David Granger. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for watching, and do join me again next time. Goodbye.
Let us cooperate for